That was Edith. She's still here. That's the girl I saw at the base of the stairs.
I mean, that looks like a 4, 5, 6-legged creature.
You have like a whole neighborhood of empty haunted houses right here.
Did you hear that?
I invite you to use my mind.
1,
2, 3,
Oh,
5, 6. You want bodies? 7, 8, 9.
Static.
It's like really freaky.
That's really scary.
David Grunman and his friend were in the desert having fun by shooting at cactuses. David, armed with a shotgun, aimed at a smaller cactus first, blasting it apart with ease. Feeling bold, he turned his sights on a giant 26-foot-tall cactus. Bullet after bullet ripped into the cactus, but then, without warning, a massive arm of the cactus snapped off. The spiny, multi-hundred-pound limb came crashing down directly onto David. The weight and the force of the impact instantly crushed him, leaving him pinned beneath the very cactus he had been destroying. Spines were puncturing deep into his flesh, skewering his arms, his chest, his throat. The sheer weight of it caved in his ribs, crushing his lungs. His friend stood frozen in horror, staring at the twisted, mangled body of David, half buried beneath the cactus, blood pooling in the dust. By the time help arrived, David's corpse lay limp beneath the very thing he had tried to destroy. David Grunman is the only known man to have ever been killed by a cactus, marking it as one of the most unlucky and random deaths ever.
A police officer approached a car in the night with his torch and was so terrified by what he saw inside, he immediately switched it off. He stood in silence in the pitch black before calling for backup. This is the terrifying case of the Westside Park murders. It was 1985 in the city of Muncie in Indiana. 16-year-old Ethan Dixon and 15-year-old Kimberly Dowell were described as the perfect all-American couple. I mean, look at them. They are beautiful. They look absolutely angelic. They were super charismatic and popular, good-looking, and great students. Both of them were very intelligent. They really had everything going for them, and they were fairly privileged. The area that they lived in was said to be kind of like the rich area of town, and Kimberly was actually the daughter of a doctor. Ethan's parents owned a factory, and the pair were set to achieve great things in life. Kimberly was a cheerleader and newly elected homecoming queen. The pair hung out regularly and were pretty unproblematic kids. They kept themselves to themselves, did their homework, never broke rules or ever get in trouble, which is why what happened next is so unsettling. On the 28th of September that year, a police officer was out late at night patrolling the Westside Park car park. Now, the car park was supposed to be closed by now, so he was pretty shocked to see a car there. He could also kind of hear music in the distance, and it appeared to be coming from a car radio. He approached this vehicle to examine it, who'd just left their car there. As he approached with his torch, he could clearly see two people inside the vehicle, and this startled him so much because they were absolutely still like statues. He was so frightened by this, he immediately turned off his torch and kind of stood in the dark in silence for a second to just process what he'd seen. Then he called for backup. Ethan and Kimberly were both inside the car, deceased. They'd both been shot and their bodies remained in the front seats of the vehicle. Now, the passenger side window was smashed, having presumably been shot out. However, this didn't look like a robbery gone wrong, as nothing was stolen from the car, and obviously the car hadn't been stolen either. There's also a radio inside still playing music, which could potentially have been worth some money back then. The teenagers both were deceased from gunshot wounds and were found reclining back in their seats, and the autopsy showed no substances or alcohol in their systems. Now, news of this homicide obviously traveled through the community like wildfire. Despite there being no actual social media or anything back in those days, everybody was talking about this double homicide and kind of sharing theories. They all desperately wanted to know what had happened to these poor school kids. Police did initially announce that they knew other people had been in the park that night and kind of advised them to hand themselves in. Well, yes, of course, other people were in the car park that night, the people or the person who committed the murder. However, nobody came forward. There was really a frustrating lack of suspects, and police just couldn't figure out a motive and therefore potential culprits. The case really grew cold and anniversaries of the killings came and went. Although police believed that there was a dark-coloured car involved, this didn't really help much. I mean, how many dark-coloured cars are there out there? Now, a person was actually identified as kind of a person of interest by a witness, and this was Kimberly's stepdad. However, he was looked into pretty quickly and was kind of ruled out as a suspect. There wasn't that much evidence linking him to this scene. It was kind of just somebody had seen a person that looked kind of like him. There was also really no motive for Kimberly's stepdad to want to kill her or the boyfriend. There was also really nobody else that was known to be an enemy of the pair or would even want to harm them in any way, let alone kill them. Police looked into the possibility that this may have been a substance deal gone wrong, but as I said, these were good kids. They weren't involved in any substances as far as everybody knew. It could have been mistaken identity, potentially, but although these theories kind of rumbled on, nothing was found. Eerily, this case is still unsolved and remains a chilling mystery.
One of the most terrifying things to me is when someone vanishes into thin air with absolutely no logical explanation as to what happened to them, especially when they disappear in a short amount of time in an extremely short distance. I am a firm believer that people don't just disappear, but that's what happened to 20-year-old Ryan Stuka, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance are just really bizarre, so let's talk about it. Ryan Stuka was just 1 month shy of his 21st birthday when he mysteriously disappeared on February 17th, 2018. He lived in Beaumont, Alberta, where the rest of his family lives. But on December 1st, 2017, he decided to move to Sun Peaks, which is a really tiny ski resort village in British Columbia. He had never left home before, but he was really excited for this move because he was moving with his best friend to go and do one of the things he loved most, which was snowboarding. He and his friend were going to spend the season snowboarding and working as lift operators at the Sun Peaks Village ski resort. And although he was a little nervous to leave home, he was really excited. He was only going to be there for a few months anyway, as he'd go back home to Alberta in the spring. But before he got the chance to go back home, he would disappear, leaving behind no clues. And what exactly happened that winter night has never been explained. So the day before Ryan disappeared, which was Friday, February 16th, he worked the full day and then went to his home in Sun Peaks, which he shared with a few roommates. Later that night, Ryan and a few of his friends/roommates went to a silent disco event that was being hosted at a local pub. And then after, they all went to a house party not far away located on Burfield Drive. A few hours would go by, everyone was having fun, and then at 2 a.m., one of Ryan's roommates got tired and decided to head home. They all lived just a short walk away from this house party, and it wasn't unusual for them to just walk home. A few minutes later, another one of Ryan's roommates decided to get up and leave the party, also heading home. And this roommate thought Ryan was right behind him. At 2:10 a.m., Ryan was seen standing up, and he was believed to have been putting on his coat and shoes to go home as well. But after this, Ryan vanished. This was the last time he was ever seen alive. He never made it home that night. And when he didn't show up for work the next day, his roommates and friends knew something was horribly wrong. Ryan never missed work, and the fact that he wasn't answering their calls and texts, they just knew something wasn't quite right. They tried looking at security footage and called everyone Ryan knew in the area as well as local hospitals, but nobody knew where Ryan was or what happened to him. It was at this point that his roommates called his parents to let him know that Ryan was missing, and then they reported him missing to the police at 8:47 p.m. His parents lived over 9 hours away, but when they heard Ryan was missing, they packed their bags and immediately took off for Sun Peaks. The Kamloops RCMP launched a massive search for Ryan involving tracking dogs, drones, infrared cameras, snowmobiles, and helicopters. And on top of police searching, Ryan's parents and hundreds of volunteers diligently searched the entire village. But absolutely no trace of Ryan was ever found. It's believed that Ryan left the house party that night and started to walk home. But the biggest question is what happened to him in that short distance? It wasn't unusual for Ryan to go out with his friends and socialize. And since he didn't know the area super well, he never just wandered off without them. So for him to just vanish off the face of the earth like this was scary and overall just very strange. At the beginning of the investigation, police thought maybe he had been drinking at the party and became too intoxicated, maybe passing out somewhere outside, which was obviously very time sensitive because the night Ryan went missing, the weather dropped to below -14 degrees Fahrenheit and had snowed about 8 inches. So if that was the case and he did end up passing out somewhere outside, it seemed likely that he was just buried in snow somewhere along the route that he would have taken to get home. But after digging through the snow and as time passed and all the snow melted, there were still no signs of Ryan. Here we are today, 7 years later, and not one single clue as to what happened to him has ever resurfaced. Over the years, though, there have been three main theories as to what could have happened to him. Theory number one is that he did end up getting lost in the woods after leaving the party that night. There is a good possibility that he was intoxicated and ended up getting lost since he wasn't extremely used to the area and died of exposure. But you would think that after all this time that something would have been found by now, like some of his remains or his clothing or any of his personal belongings that he had on him that night. But not even one piece of his clothing was found. One thing that was brought up about this theory is that he could have been attacked by a wild animal after leaving the party. But again, there was no evidence left behind of anything, let alone an animal attack. You'd think that if he was attacked by an animal that some blood would be left behind or drag marks or even ripped clothing, but there was absolutely nothing. Another theory is that he was met with foul play to some extent. Some people believe that after leaving the party that night that he could have been a victim of a hit and run. And after Googling hit and run cases in Sun Peak, I'm honestly kind of shocked how many there were in the last 10 years. So this does seem like a potential possibility. The theory is that he was hit by a car accidentally and whoever hit him moved his body elsewhere, either off the mountain or out of Sun Peaks altogether. But again, you'd think that there would be some evidence of this in the area, like tire marks or blood left behind, but there was nothing. The last theory is that something happened to Ryan at the house party that night, either accidentally or on purpose, and it was covered up in some way. Some people suspect that Ryan could have overdosed accidentally in the house, and the people at the party helped cover it up. Other people believe that he could have had his life taken in that house by another person, and although there isn't much known about the house party that night, it was searched. So if something truly did happen there, I'm sure evidence would have been found by now. Kind of adding onto this theory is what a man who was staying at a home near Ryan's house had to say. This man said that on the night Ryan disappeared, he heard a guy who was pretty angry yelling to get in the effing car. Now, this could be anything. I know when it's super cold out, I hate when people take a long time getting into the car, so this doesn't sound super unusual to me, but it could also mean something more sinister. And then there's what a retired RCMP investigator had to say when investigating Ryan's disappearance. He initially thought that Ryan just accidentally got lost and died of exposure, but then he interviewed one of Ryan's friends, and that interview changed his mind a little bit. The investigator said that this friend was extremely nervous and acting really strange. And although this information was given to authorities, nothing ever came of it. This theory that something happened at the house party and everyone helped cover it up doesn't seem very likely to me, just based on the fact that when you have that many people in on something, someone at some point is going to say something, and 7 years have passed without a word. It is clear, though, that something bad happened to Ryan, as there's been no activity on his cell phone, social media, or bank accounts since that fateful night. The Kamloops RCMP hasn't ruled out foul play, but they also haven't found anything criminally suspicious, or anything at all for that matter. They also said that there's no evidence that Ryan ever left the Sun Peaks area. So as time passes, Ryan's case is still frozen in time. And with a lack of any evidence, it's left many wondering what really happened to him. There's currently a $25,000 reward for any information leading to Ryan's whereabouts. His family has gone on to make this Facebook page where they continue to post updates and any information about the case. It kind of created this movement where little green dinosaurs with some of Ryan's information attached to it have been placed all around the world. When people see them, they often take pictures of it and post it to the Facebook group. And in a way, it's a way for Ryan to travel all over the world and touch so many people. The green dinosaurs stemmed from Ryan loving dinosaurs as a kid. His mom said that when he was little, they all played a game together where they had to guess the type of dinosaur. In one of his mom's first ever posts on the Facebook page, she said, quote, "Ryan, wherever you are, let's talk about dinosaurs." And that just breaks my heart. The not knowing is literally devastating, and his family just deserves answers. I just can't fathom that 1 second you're living your life and the next, everything changes. These are some of Ryan's characteristics and what he was last seen wearing. If you have any information about his disappearance, please contact the number on the screen.
Show you a video which was a security camera of the hospital, and it captured this. What the Wait, I just realized they walked through him. Nah, there's no way this is real. There's no fucking way. What the
As if it's not even there.
What the I truly believe that, that when you're about to pass away, they say like somebody comes, like a spirit comes and picks you up and takes you to the afterlife.
The video I just showed you allegedly depicts the death of this man, Hugo Figueroa. Hugo was the nephew of famous Mexican singer Joan Sebastian, and Hugo was a rising name in the music industry in Mexico. About a year ago, when Hugo was traveling in Mexico, he was suddenly approached by 7 armed men in a place called Plaza de Toros or La Aurora. Now, allegedly, the men that kidnapped Hugo were from the Los Viagras cartel, and it's been suspected that Hugo himself had ties to their rival cartel, the CJNG. There's more video that was released of Hugo's abduction that's simply too disturbing to show on TikTok, where masked men tell him you're not at home anymore, don't mess with the people of the hills, and they keep telling him to shut up and threatening him. Shortly afterwards, Hugo's dead body was found on the side of the road in an area close by. It's unknown exactly what Hugo was killed for, but this is just yet another reason why, if you already don't understand why, you do not mess with the Mexican cartels. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to my podcast, Murder in America, that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
This is one of the worst ways somebody has ever died. In October 2012, an awful and disturbing thing happened. A 62-year-old employee at Bumblebee Foods named Jose Molina was having a normal day in the Bumblebee facility in California. In his schedule, Jose was tasked with the performance maintenance on an 11-meter-long industrial oven, so he went inside one of the tanks to begin his work. Believing that Jose was in the bathroom, one of his coworkers actually shut the tank's door, trapping Jose inside, and then filled the oven with 5,400 kilograms of tuna and then turned the oven on. A search then ensued when the manager realized Jose was missing, but by then it was way too late. They found Jose's body 2 hours later inside the oven, completely burnt and melted away, 100% unrecognizable. The temperature inside the oven reached 270 degrees Fahrenheit, and Jose was unfortunately cooked alive inside of the tank with all the fish. And you could only imagine how horrific this death actually was. Could you imagine being cooked alive and then being crushed by tens of thousands of pounds of fish, mixed with the smell, the texture, the heat? This death was just awful. The company Bumblebee and 2 managers were actually charged for this death, and the company got off with a $6 million settlement. But do you think $6 million is way too low for a death like this? Many people believe it should have been more close to $50 million. Nonetheless, this is by far one of the worst and most uncomfortable deaths of all time, and I can't imagine Jose's thoughts as he was being cooked alive with hundreds of fish.
She called her mum in a panic, saying she'd seen a terrifying handprint on her bathroom mirror. She said it looked like somebody had put their hand on the mirror and dragged it down like out of a horror film. A month later, she vanished. This is the horrifying case of the murder of Stephanie Paz. Stephanie Paz was 25 years old. She lived in Freehold Township in New Jersey all of her life and was a huge Yankees fan. She was tiny at 4'11", but her dad described her as an absolute firecracker. She really was full of life. She adored children and looking after children, and she turned this passion into her career and worked as a nanny. She was really good at this. It was definitely one of her callings in life. She was also extremely talented, as you can see, as a makeup artist and specialized in special effects makeup. Now, so much so that she actually gained a big following online, posting these crazy makeup looks. It wasn't only makeup that she was posting about online. She also wanted to find a boyfriend and was active on online dating sites. That was until she met a man called John Osbilgen. He was 29, so he was a little bit older than her, but she kind of liked that. He was a stockbroker from New Jersey who worked on Staten Island, and she felt like he was a catch. The relationship moved pretty quickly, and Stephanie really did think she'd met a good guy, but her dad kind of felt differently. He had this gut feeling that John just wasn't right for her, but she insisted that he gave him a chance. And the dad's gut instinct was right. I mean, usually parents kind of know best in these cases. And John had actually previously been arrested on substance charges and for assaulting a female. The relationship between John and Stephanie quickly became toxic. She really wasn't happy, so much so that she'd even tried to end it with John, but he actually became violent. She got the police involved and she told them she was scared that he would become violent again, but he was very manipulative and he kept worming his way back into her life. Then some really weird things started happening that really freaked Stephanie out. In early October, Stephanie called her mum in a panic, saying that she felt the house she was in was haunted or possessed. She had found a spindly handprint on the bathroom mirror that, quote, looked like somebody put their hand on it and dragged their fingers down. And this wasn't the only chilling discovery. A few days later, unfortunately, she found her beloved pet parakeet dead at the bottom of its cage, and it was apparently cold as stone. Were these two things just eerie coincidences? On the 30th of October 2019, Stephanie and her family went to a psychic show. They had a great time, and when they parted ways that evening, Stephanie's mum kissed her and said, "Let me know when you get home safe." She never heard from her daughter again. Alarm bells really started to ring the following day when Stephanie failed to show up for her nanny job. Now, she was usually very reliable, so her family just knew something was up. Strangely, her car and her phone were discovered at her house. But there was no sign of Stephanie, and strangely, her dog was there just on its own. There was no sign of forced entry or really any clues as to what could have happened to Stephanie. A huge group of volunteers actually searched miles and miles of land to look for any kind of clues or signs of the missing woman. They were nicknamed by Stephanie's family Steph's Angels. Now, John was an obvious suspect from the get-go, and police interviewed him, but he seemed just as confused as everyone else. He said he'd stayed the night with Stephanie that night, and the last he saw, she was getting ready for work. John's phone was seized by officers, and what authorities found next was incredibly disturbing. Though it didn't really help them to figure out where Stephanie was, they found illegal images of minors on his phone, so he was obviously arrested immediately. They did notice that he had some marks on his neck at this point. Now, was this a clue as to Stephanie's fate? They ended up using more information from his phone, specifically GPS data, to try and track down any places of interest. This led them to Long Pond Park, and the phone actually indicated he'd been there for around 6 hours after Stephanie was reported missing by her mum. What on earth was he doing in that park for so long? Yet more data was uncovered from the phone, including nasty messages from John to Stephanie the night before she disappeared. And he was pretty much blaming her for the failure of the relationship, and Stephanie was just ignoring him. Frustratingly, police had no luck finding Stephanie and had no real solid evidence that John was responsible, so they had to let him go. Then, just 3 days later, there was some news. John had unalived himself in the garage of his parents' home and left 2 notes. The first note to his family read, "Dear Mum, Dad, Sal and Sammy, sorry about all this craziness. I've been miserable for so long now. I had enough. Thanks for everything. I can't do life in prison. Most of the stuff you will hear is true, except the child blank. I would never do that. Use the pics of me and blank for the funeral. That was the only time in my life I was truly happy. I want blank to help plan everything with you. Tell her I'm sorry and I love her. She was so good to me. We had an amazing life. I blank it up. She only did good for me. I dug myself a deep hole. This is the only choice. I love you guys." Now, the second note was to his ex-girlfriend, basically stating a lot of waffle. She was the best thing that ever happened to him, and asking her why she got a restraining order against him. He said he wished he could go back in time, and horrifically starts berating Stephanie in the letter, that the girl in the news was a piece of S that hurt him over and over. Now, interestingly, in the letter, obviously he stated, "Most of the stuff you will hear is true, and I dug myself a deep hole." Police took this as a confession of guilt in Stephanie's case. His parents weirdly didn't, though, and they chose to believe that he was not guilty. They said that there was nothing in this letter up here that indicated that he actually killed Stephanie. So let me know your thoughts on that. On the 26th of January 2020, 2 members of the public stumbled upon what they thought was a mannequin by the side of the road. It turned out to be Stephanie, lying face down, deceased. Her cause of death was never released. Her family were understandably absolutely heartbroken, and the person responsible just never got brought to justice.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
My husband and I sold steaks made from human flesh. My name is Natalia Bakshiva, and together with my husband Dmitry Bakshiv, we were known as the Krasnodar Cannibals, and you will soon understand why. Together, we killed and devoured dozens of people from Russia, just like us. To hide our acts, I discovered that my culinary talents could help us make money and round off our month-end finances while concealing and using our corpse remains. That's when we started selling pies and minced steaks to people without revealing that it was human meat. But our dark secret didn't last. One day my husband lost his phone on the street, and it contained macabre photos, including pictures of how we made our steaks. We were then arrested in 2017, and investigators found human remains in our freezer. I was therefore sentenced to 10 years in prison, and my husband was sentenced to 12 years in prison and is required to undergo psychiatric treatment. Do you think it's deserved or not? Let me know in the comments.
I had sex with my 14-year-old student when I was 23. My name is Hannah Harris, and I was a teaching assistant. I was working at a school in North London where a 14-year-old boy was attending. At the beginning of the year, I noticed this boy, and we exchanged numbers. I then set up a stratagem to get closer to the pupil, so I started taking him to the store to buy his favorite sweets. I bought him ice cream several times, and I even took her to McDonald's. And so that his parents wouldn't think it was strange, I made them believe I was the mother of the teenager's girlfriend. By doing all this, I managed to get closer to him and get what I really wanted, but I blackmailed him to keep it all secret. Then one day while we were in a supermarket parking lot, his older brother saw us doing things together, so he immediately alerted his parents and an investigation was launched. I was sentenced to 6 years in prison, and I'm now banned from working with minors and registered as a sex offender for life. Do you think it's deserved?
75 passengers lost their lives because I let my children into the cockpit. My name is Yaroslav Kudrinsky, and in 1994, I was one of the pilots on a flight from Russia to Hong Kong. This time, my 2 children were passengers on the flight, so it was very special for me. A few hours after takeoff, I decided to let my children into the cockpit to show them how everything worked. While the plane was on autopilot, I let them sit in the main seats and play with the plane's controls. They were excited, and since it was on autopilot, it supposedly wasn't dangerous. I told my son he could turn the wheel to see how it felt. Unfortunately, this deactivated the autopilot, and before we knew it, we were almost at 90 degrees and descending uncontrollably. We tried to turn the plane around, but we just couldn't do it. We didn't know what was happening, nor could the air traffic controllers help us. Unfortunately, we crashed into a mountain in Russia and we all lost our lives.
I was shot 9 times in the same night and survived. My name is Curtis Jackson, but you probably know me better as 50 Cent. I was born in Queens, New York, into a family involved in drug trafficking. My mother died in a mysterious fire when I was only 8 years old. I was raised by my grandmother, but I started selling drugs at the age of 12 to survive. I was arrested multiple times for drug trafficking, but it was in 2000 that my life almost took a fatal turn. One evening, as I was about to get into my car, a man approached and opened fire. I was hit 9 times, including a bullet to the cheek that left a visible hole. Doctors told me I had little chance of surviving, but I proved them wrong. After my recovery, I decided to focus on my music career. I was discovered by Eminem and Dr. Dre, who signed me to their label. My first album, Get Rich or Die Trying, was a phenomenal success, propelling me to the top of the charts. But even at the top, life was not easy. Today, I am not only a successful rapper, but also an actor, producer, and entrepreneur.
These are the weirdest facts you will ever hear. Part 1. Abraham Lincoln once pardoned a man who was accused of trying to have sex with a horse. And the reason President Lincoln pardoned him was because the man was drunk. Next up, ancient pharaohs used to masturbate and ejaculate into the Nile River to make sure the river will continue flowing. This is absolutely crazy, and just imagine being a bystander watching this. Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the 36th president of the United States, often whipped out his penis, which he nicknamed Jumbo. And he also peed himself a lot and in public. Next, until the late 1800s, some male singers would be castrated to preserve their high-pitched voice, which is just insane. Adolf Hitler had a micro you-know-what. And not only that, he did not pee out of the tip. He had a condition where he peed from the underside of his you-know-what. This definitely made him a super insecure man. Finally, noble women in ancient Rome would often pay to sleep with gladiators. And some gladiators were so popular that they were able to buy their freedom with the money they made from doing it. This is what would happen if oxygen disappeared for 5 seconds. Up first, in just 5 seconds without oxygen, you can say goodbye to anything that was made of concrete. These structures would instantly collapse because oxygen acts as a special binding agent to concrete, and without it, concrete is just dust. Next up, there would be no more ozone layer. The ozone layer is our protection against the sun's UV rays, and it's made of oxygen. And there would be nothing protecting us from the UV rays. On top of that, our inner ear would explode. Losing oxygen means losing 21% of our air pressure. A change in air pressure that drastic is the same as being at sea level and then dropping down to 2,000 meters instantly. Next, without oxygen, there is no fire. So the combustion process in vehicles won't be able to occur. Any mode of transport that isn't electric will automatically fail. Planes will fall from the sky and millions of cars will be stopped in their tracks. Finally, as all that is happening, the Earth's crust would completely crumble. That is because Earth's crust is made up of 45% oxygen. Without oxygen involved in the surface, there wouldn't be much left. The crust would crumble and continue to crumble until there is completely nothing left, sending you and every single person on the planet into a freefall.
The black paintings made by Francisco Goya are some of the most disturbing works of art ever produced, and the story behind them is interesting as well. So Francisco Goya is one of the most renowned artists of all time, but these paintings from his final years of his life, dubbed the black paintings, are disturbing. This work right here shows a witch's Sabbath. I mean, you can see a sort of Baphomet-influenced figure up top, people cowering in fear. And what I think was really crazy that I found out about this is that these paintings were not actually painted on canvases. In February of 1819, Francisco Goya acquired a villa in Spain. And during his time spent living in this villa, apparently he was going through a lot. In contrast to other works that he had been hired to produce or commissioned to produce, these were works of art that he did in his own home, all over the walls. And they really showed his innermost emotions and his thoughts. I mean, the entire villa of Francisco's was completely decorated with all of these different works. And in order for them to be preserved, they eventually had to be removed from the villa itself. The layers of wallpaper were removed and stuck onto canvases, and that's how the black paintings came to be. Now, a lot of people have been to the museum where these are displayed and said that they give them a very weird, almost paranormal type vibe. Almost like when you look into these paintings, the paintings look back into you. It's definitely a collection of works that I'd love to visit one day, but I can't help but admit that they are very creepy. What do you think? Would you like to pay these paintings a visit?
Let's talk about this picture. It centers around Mr. and Mrs. Dubois. They were some of the town of Hackenshaw's favorite neighbors, but they had a dark side to them. But first, we're gonna enjoy some pizza. This is like my favorite pizza. It's from Marco's Pizza. Reminds me of Jersey because I'm from Jersey. You see, they were kind to everyone, even invited people who just moved into town for dinners. They would also have the best decorations for holidays as well. Their house would always win the contest for best decorated in the town. People just loved their Christmas lights and their Halloween decorations. In the beginning of October 1876, they started throwing parties for the kids. All the kids from around the town would come, even from outside the town. It was fun. They played games, they ate candy, everyone just had a good time. But out of the 20 kids that came over that night, about 4 went missing. And after about 3 weeks of searching, the case went slow and they gave up. Halloween finally came around, and the contest for the best decorations, of course, went to the Dubois. That night while trick-or-treating, one of the boys in town named Sam went up to one of the decorations. When he grabbed the mask off, he realized it was one of the children who went missing. The child was stuffed and put on display in front of the yard as a decoration. The Dubois, who saw this and not wanting to get caught, grabbed the little kid inside, adding him to their collection. No one suspected a thing because the Dubois was so kind and nice to everyone. It wasn't until years later on their deathbed that they admitted at throwing parties every year to steal a child or 3 and told police that they could find all the missing children in their basement. The reason they did it was because they needed decorations realistic enough so they could always win those contests.
This is Justin Smith, the Nickelodeon Predator. You may have seen him before on the show To Catch a Predator with Chris Hansen. I mean, it's hard to forget this guy with his very unique Nickelodeon colored hair. But he was one of the worst. So at the time that he was caught in the sting, Justin Smith was a 27-year-old freelance post-production editor working for Nickelodeon Studios. And at the time that he was caught in the sting, he thought that he was talking to an underage girl named, ironically, Carly. The full chat logs between Justin and Carly are available online, and they are incredibly disturbing to read. And obviously it shows that this guy was a dangerous predator. Like always happens with these predators online, he engaged this girl in a very normal way at first, and then it slowly descended into these dark, very, very inappropriate discussions, which then led Justin to show up at the Sting house knowing that he had everything to lose. Now, I would count Justin as an unofficial member of the Nickelodeon Creep Club, because there have been a number of people that have worked at and for Nickelodeon that have abused kids, and have been suspected of abusing kids over the years. Now, even though he was arrested after the sting, sadly Justin served no jail time. He had to volunteer. He now has to register as a sex offender, but that was it. Now, I don't know if this is the same Justin Smith that was caught on To Catch a Predator, but if you look up Justin Smith on IMDb, you are led to a profile of a guy who has worked with a number of Nickelodeon shows on the post-production side of things. And this IMDb states that he was actually rehired in the year 2019 to work on Nickelodeon shows. Now, I don't know if this is a different Justin Smith, and I definitely don't want to slander his name if it isn't the same guy that we're talking about here, but if it is, I cannot believe Nickelodeon would rehire a attempted child predator to keep working on children's shows. And if that is true, it would show that Nickelodeon never really learned their lesson from any of these cases. This man went from a national hero to a national villain in just a day's time. This is Bernie Ward, a former talk show host from San Francisco, California. Bernie was for a long time the host of a daily news program called The Bernie Ward Show. He also hosted a 3-hour-long radio program on Sundays called God Talk. Bernie was a bleeding heart liberal. He preached about women's rights. He preached against homophobia. He tried to get the Catholic Church to come clean about their sexual abuse scandals. And over time, he raised $4 million for charity through an annual Thanksgiving event. Now, Bernie was actually so well loved by his community that when it was rumored that the station was going to cancel his show, hundreds, thousands of people showed up to protest the show's cancellation, and they got him put back on air. But Bernie's star would dramatically burn out in the year 2007. You see, on September 20th, 2007, Bernie was indicted for 2 counts of attempting to distribute and 1 count of receiving CP or CSAM materials. The story goes like this. A dominatrix who worked online contacted the police after having some disturbing chats with Bernie. Apparently, he described to this online dominatrix in a chat room about how he had engaged in explicit activities with his own children, and he then sent her CP images through the chat. Now, when Bernie was arrested, he claimed that this was all innocent role-playing and that he was actually studying American culture for a new book he was writing. His attorney even insisted he was not in possession of CP materials, but that whole narrative changed soon after, because when they checked Bernie's email account, they found over 100 images of CP or CSAM. He was then sentenced to only 6 years in prison, and he was released in the year 2014. That means that Bernie is still out there somewhere, able to access a computer, and only God knows what he's up to nowadays.
This is the disturbing case of the Slender Man stabbing. On the morning of the 31st of May 2014, a man on a bike ride in Wisconsin made a shocking discovery. A 12-year-old girl, Peyton Leutner, was lying on the grass covered in blood. The day prior, the young girl had been at a sleepover with some of her friends. She hadn't realized that the sleepover had been a trick to lure her into the woods to murder her. 2 years before what the media dubbed the Slender Man stabbing, Peyton had met her friend Morgan at school. The pair had become friends when Peyton noticed her sitting alone in the cafeteria and felt sorry for her. The two became close, and then they made another friend, Anissa Weir. Anissa, on the left here, was described as a cruel girl. She seemed really jealous of the friendship between Peyton and Morgan. As their friendship grew, Anissa and Morgan became obsessed with the internet meme Slender Man. Slender Man was a tall, faceless man with long arms who turned viral when people would Photoshop him into creepy images. The mythical man would prey on young children and lure them into the woods to kill people. Shockingly, around December 2013, Morgan and Anissa concocted a plan to kill someone in order to show their dedication to the fictional Slender Man. Their plan was to invite Peyton to Morgan's birthday to get her alone, and then lure her into the woods and kill her. Morgan actually described this as a flawless plan. As the girls started their walk to the woods, Morgan snuck a knife from her kitchen into her waistband. They then completely blindsided poor Peyton. Morgan jumped on top of her and started stabbing her. The two perpetrators then run off, claiming that they were going to go and get help. The young girl was left to struggle on her own and crawl towards the road to get help. When the cyclist discovered her, an ambulance arrived and nurses noted that she had 19 stab wounds. She had 6 hours of intensive surgery but miraculously survived. The girls were charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide. Now, the jury actually found Morgan not criminally responsible due to schizophrenia. She was sentenced to 40 years in a mental health institution. Anissa had apparently experienced shared psychotic disorder and was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health institution. This is the horrific case of the acid bath murderer. In February 1949, a warehouse was raided. Police stormed the West Sussex premises of John Haig. Inside, they discovered enormous containers of sulfuric acid. Horrifically, they also unearthed nearly 30 pounds of melted human body fat and a foot. It was obviously the scene of a horrific crime, and the acid was there to assist in a cover-up. John Haig was born into a wealthy family in Yorkshire. Although he was a high achiever in school, he was arrested aged 25 and jailed for fraud. His life spiraled downhill after this, and his family decided to cut him off, and his wife left him. After being released from prison, he continued to scam people out of money. He pretended to be a solicitor and sold people fraudulent shares. Again, he got found out and was imprisoned. This is when he realized that in order to truly get away with his crimes, he couldn't leave his victims alive. He started researching murderers and how they would dispose of bodies. He figured out sulfuric acid would help him to dispose of evidence. When he was yet again released from prison, he bumped into an old friend, William McSwan, who was working as a landlord. Now, because John was jealous of William's success, he lured him into an abandoned basement and killed him by hitting him over the head. He then dissolved William's body in a huge drum of acid until he turned to liquid. John was able to then simply pour him away. John then took over William's landlord job, and when William's family became suspicious, he killed them too. He stole $10,000 from the deceased family, and due to a gambling problem, the money quickly ran out. He needed to find another wealthy couple to rob and murder. After pretending to be interested in buying a house from a couple, he murdered them. Archibald and Rose Henderson were his victims. They were again disposed of with acid in his warehouse. After 5 murders, he ended up renting a bigger warehouse in order to kill his next victim. He murdered his wealthy, widowed neighbor after luring her into the warehouse. Now, John's mistake was this new warehouse had no drainage. He was unable to dump the liquid body into sewers and had to store it behind the property. Police made the gruesome discovery, and John was charged with murder. He pleaded insanity and said that drinking the blood of his victims caused him to go mad. The jury rejected this, and he was sentenced to death. He was executed in 1949.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This is the most sick, disturbing killer couple I've ever heard of. Canadian couple Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka seemed like a normal boyfriend and girlfriend. Paul was a salesman and Carla had a degree in psychology. Prior to meeting Carla, Paul had a troubled childhood. In 1975, his dad was convicted for SAing a child. There were even rumors that he'd SA'd his own daughter. When Paul grew up and went to uni in Toronto, he started picking up women at bars and clubs and taking them back to humiliate and beat them. Now, in May 1987, Scarborough in Ontario was tormented by hideous crimes. In one instance, a young girl was grabbed off the bus near her parents' house and SA'd. The following week, there were 2 similar assaults. Over a period of 5 years, Paul was responsible for these assaults and many more. He's thought to have R'd or attempted to R over 19 girls. Paul then met Carla in 1987. The pair were a toxic concoction as they both shared the same sick fantasies. While they dated, Paul was SAing girls in the local area and Carla approved of this. Disgustingly, soon Paul turned his attention to Carla's 15-year-old sister, Tammy. Carla sickeningly expressed a wish for Paul to have Tammy's V as a Christmas present. Helping Paul to fulfill their sick desire, Carla spiked her own sister's drink, and the pair took turns SAing her. They videotaped the whole brutal act. Tragically, the young girl began to choke on her own vomit and died. Her death was ruled an accident. In 1991, Carla lured another teenage girl to their home. They spiked and abused her and again videotaped it. The girl had absolutely no memory of the incident. The pair got married in June 1991, and on the day of their wedding, a couple were out canoeing when they discovered human body parts in the water. The body parts belonged to a 14-year-old who had disappeared on the 15th of June. This girl was Leslie Maffei. The couple had again SA'd her before killing her. In 1992, another teenager was snatched by the couple. They killed 15-year-old Kristen French and dumped her in a ditch. Now, tips soon came into police about Paul and his violent nature. Things would come crumbling down for the couple when in 1993 he attacked Carla with a torch and the pair broke up. Police matched DNA from Paul to many of the cases and he was arrested. In her trial, Carla tried to claim that she was a victim herself and said that Paul was the mastermind. However, police had got hold of the sick videotapes filmed by the couple, and this completely contradicted this. Carla was imprisoned but was released in 2005 and has remarried and given birth. Paul was sentenced to life and has never shown any remorse for his victims. This police officer arrested a young girl, kidnapped her and murdered her. Sarah Everard was born in Surrey in 1987. At the time of her disappearance, she was living in the Brixton area and working as a marketing executive. On the 3rd of March 2021, she was walking home from visiting a friend in Clapham, South London. At around 9 p.m, she began the 2.5-mile journey home from her friend's house. She'd initially been chatting to her boyfriend on the phone as she walked home. She was captured on camera walking alone at around 9:32 p.m. 3 minutes later, a bus CCTV camera captured her being kidnapped. Within a matter of 5 minutes, she was gone. She'd been stopped by Wayne Couzens. He was a police officer and he used his powers to handcuff her at about 9:34 p.m. He was using the excuse of her breaching COVID guidelines. It transpired that on the 28th of February, Wayne had rented a white Vauxhall from a car hire company in Dover in order to kidnap a lone female. After kidnapping the vulnerable woman, he drove her to Kent. Police launched an urgent investigation when Sarah's boyfriend Josh reported her missing. On the 5th of March, Wayne was captured on CCTV filling a petrol container at a service station. He then shockingly burned Sarah's dead body inside of a fridge. On the